In the meantime, we have about 15 minutes to the top of the hour. Development experts have continued to be concerned about how exactly corruption is hindering development, specifically in the third world countries of Africa, Kenya not being left behind, even in the midst of government trying to fight corruption. Joining us right now to talk about development and the war on graft is Dr. David Safo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the International Center for Evaluation and Development. Thank you, Dr. Safo, for joining us, as well as Steve Ogutu, who's a communications strategist. Dr. Safo, let's start with you. And I know you're planning to bring together stakeholders to just keenly discuss how corruption is affecting development in Africa in general. Just tell us a bit more about why you're concerned as an expert in this field.
You know, one of the problems that we have in Africa is that policymakers and practitioners are coming up with policies and practice that affect the livelihood of people. But at times, the evidence for them to use in order to formulate and shape these policies and practices are lacking. And what we are trying to do is establishing the connection between evidence and public policy making and practices. Yeah. And corruption is part of it. You know, what we see in Africa is that our data or evidence in corruption are on perception. You know, all the surveys that we do in Africa are on perception survey. They are not cases of corruption in the country. Therefore, making policies based on this evidence is initially fraud. And therefore, it is very, very difficult for our government and policymakers to tackle the issue of corruption when we don't have the proper evidence to guide them in making decisions and policies that affect us as an Africa in our context.
But you know, Dr. Safo, one might ask you, there's already enough policies or systems that have been put in place to curb corruption. Is it that they're not working, or do we need to advance them?
The issue is that for you to make policy, you need the evidence that can help you to do it. If you are making a policy on evidence that are just giving you the awareness, like the perception survey,
and not the solutions,
but not the solution, it doesn't really help you to do the right type of policy. Like when we talk about corruption in Kenya, what type of corruption are we talking about? We have three types of corruption. We have the grand corruption, that is the political influence that everybody is talking about in politics. We have petty corruption, that is happening in every organization. You go and you want a passport, you want a permit, you want a land title, and you have to pay somebody. Then we have the state capture. That is private sectors that are controlling government institutions. Without knowing what type of corruption we are tackling with, you go and make a policy or a practice, and which type are you talking about? So you need to know that the evidence I'm using to make the policy is based on a sound data that can help you to tackle the issue. And that's what we talk about.
I'll come back to you, Dr. A, but let me hear from you, Steve. And, you know, the lack of these better policies in place leads to, you know, far much deeper corruption cases. What are some of the consequences we're looking at here in terms of, you know, matters development?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ian. I think just like Dr. Ameyaw has mentioned, you know, what we need to see as a country going forward. I know we have a lot of policies in place, but they're not being followed as it's supposed to be, you know, and lack of following these policies that we have, or paying lip service to them. That's why we are seeing a very increased level of corruption, you know. Like I mentioned, a recent research that was done indicates that Kenya loses about 400 billion Kenya shillings every year to corruption, you know. And these are money that indeed can be used to develop, you know, this country, to create jobs for the youth who are languishing in poverty, you know, to improve healthcare for that woman who want to, you know, who want to to take care of their young ones back in the villages, you know, and to even improve the infrastructure here and there. And so I feel that this kind of event that organizations like ICE, where Dr. Ameyaw comes from, trying to put in place, are things that actually stakeholders need to be involved in. The government need to partner with such organization to make certain that this menace of corruption is addressed. Like, just as a country, I think I would like to say that corruption requires a stakeholders approach. You know, it cannot be tackled just by the government. We need to have development players come in place so we can have a collaborative effort to address this menace.
And Dr. Ameyaw, as part of your evidence collection, can you, do you disagree with the narrative that almost squarely corruption is within the government and entities?
Well, that is at times some of the myths that we have. That's, you know, when we talk about evidence to demonstrate corruption, we talk about only one aspect of corruption, that is the grand corruption. But we forget the petty corruption that is going on every day, everywhere. We talk about the state capture that is going on everywhere. Therefore, the problem that we are having is that for you to make a policy to address this issue, we leave it to policymakers without citizen participation, without the accountability of everybody, without the institutional reforms that have to happen in order for you to arrest it. And these are some of the things that we need sound data instead of the international collected perception surveys that will rank Kenya. Maybe they said Kenya is ranked 54 among the 54 countries in Africa, and everybody is shaking, and the news dwell on it. But when you look at the stakeholders in Kenya, what are we talking about? And where are that data coming from? And how do we use the data to help our policymakers to come up with policy that will tackle every level that corruption is being affected? Because corruption affects the overall economic performance of every country.
From your understanding, and I know I'd already posed this question to Steve, what kind of consequences do we look at overall?
The consequences are huge. You know, making a policy based on a wrong evidence have a big consequence on the national economy. The structure transformation of every economy depends on the data that they are using to make the decision. And these are some of the issues. You know, when you look at Africa currently, you know, the amount of money that we assume is getting out through corruption is somewhere around 24% of the national GDP. You know, which is a huge amount. But we are aware, everybody in Kenya or any part of Africa is aware that corruption is going on. The problem we have is what solutions can we come up in order to combat it?
Dr. Ameyaw, even with perhaps policies in place, some say that fighting corruption requires behavioral change.
Yes.
How can you do that?
Yes. First of all, what you need is ownership and accountability. For example, if we are going to construct a road in my village, are the villagers aware of the cost of that road? Who is going to do it? How many months is the person going to do it? And what is their role in ensuring that the contractor is doing a good job? So, one, citizens' participation. Two, good institutions. You know, if we have good institutional reform, like Korea, what Korea does is that every year they do institutional survey, and people who get services from those institutions are sent out questionnaires where they answer the services that they have received. Based on that one, they are able to know which institutions are giving the right type of services to the people. In Africa, we don't do that. We need to do those things. We have to hold institutions accountable.
And that is on the 26th of this month in an organization by the Ministry of National Planning as well as Treasury and the International Center for Evaluation and Development and other partners are coming together to talk about the importance of evidence collection for policy change on the war against graft. Steve, could you tell us a bit more about this day and what to expect?
I think Dr. Ameyaw can elaborate more on that.
Okay, go ahead.
We are bringing together policymakers, practitioners, researchers who have generated evidence.
Okay.
So the theme of the conference is connecting evidence with policy and practices. And we are inviting all people. It is happening on USIU campus, one of the multi-modern campuses in Kenya. And we are inviting all to come and see how do we use research, evaluation, the evidence that we generate to shape policies that affect people's livelihood, such as corruption and other initiatives that are going on.
And as we finish, implementation of the policies has also been an issue through time because, and you might have had this phrase that Kenya has very good laws, but the problem is implementation, not a new phrase. Your thought on that?
Yes. You know, for you to do, and that is why organizations like International Center for Evaluation and Development are partnering with the National Monitoring and Evaluation under the National Treasury and Planning to come up with strategies, plans to monitor, track, and evaluate implementation of these policies, and then be able to report and demonstrate to citizens that these policies are actually being implemented.
Okay.
These are some of the things that we are working with the government to be able to
Steve, on the issue of implementation and some of the policies that might come up from this event, talk about that.
Well, I think, like it's been explained, it's going to be a really informative session, and I feel that if these the deliberations that are going to be made from there, I hope that the different ministries are going to come up with very clear, policies that are based on evidence, so that we can address corruption from an evidence-based perspective, as opposed to perception, where we just assume that corruption exists, but we don't have the data to really indicate corruption is happening in which level, and then how can we address this menace?
Dr. Ameyaw, your final word, I'd like that to be on the importance of citizenry participation in exercises such as this, but even on the larger picture, their participation on matters governance as well.
Yes, it's very, very important. When you talk about governance, you are talking about people's ability to govern themselves and hold themselves accountable. The good thing and the beauty of accountability or monitoring and evaluation is giving people information to hold those in power accountable for their decisions and practices. And this is what we are trying to advocate with the Ministry for Planning and Treasury, especially the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, to come up with systems where citizens will be informed to know what is happening, so that they will be able to hold those in power accountable, and then accountability will form the basis of governance.
Steve, final word?
I think yesterday was the International Day African Day
of Anti-Corruption.
Yes. And I think, like I said, I think we need to really, as Africa, we need to come back to our senses and look at where we're going wrong. And how best can we address this thing? We are losing a lot as a continent and as a country to corruption. And these very few individuals who are controlling the economy at the expense of the livelihoods of the Kenyan people. I think going forward, we need to look at, adopt the evidence-based approach to tackle matters corruption, and to work collaboratively with other stakeholders in this country to make certain that this menace is addressed once and for all.